this computer. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name's Suj.
And my name is James.
Thursday means Throwback Thursday, James, where we look back at something from the past, as a lot of football content has to be right now, because there is no real football.
And there may be no future.
It's just going to end forever. I heard that the Premier League are meeting tomorrow, talking about discussing a hard deadline of June the 30th to end the season, regardless of what happens.
Yeah, well, guess what? If that's their hard deadline, this season will get voided. I'm not joking.
It's going to be very hard, unless they restart behind closed doors in camps. That's the only way they'll get it done before then, because we're due to be announced 3 weeks more of lockdown today, right? Which takes us into at least the second week of May, or first week of May. And then you're talking about 6 weeks to finish the season.
Right, they need to come back and train and make sure everything's safe, I think, for a few weeks as well. This is best case scenarios here. There's not going to be any Premier League before June. I don't know. Anybody who thinks different, I think they're living like in a fantasy.
Yeah.
I see the fantasy website has removed the fixtures completely.
They have now.
It's like no game week 38 or nothing.
Uh-huh.
I get a few DMs, people saying to me, what should I do? I don't fucking know.
This is going to be one of those seasons that has a little asterisk associated to it when it's finally finished.
I think so, possibly. I think it's more the case of will Liverpool get the asterisks or not, isn't it? Is the biggest question.
It's true. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the Ajax team from 1995.
The Ajax team.
Ajax of Amsterdam.
Ajax of Amsterdam.
1995 team that won the Champions League against AC Milan 1-0. Now, there is nobody in that team that most football fans will not have heard of at some point, including most of the bench as well.
It's an astonishing set of players, and we're going to look at this throwback as more of a look at what the players did in their careers rather than what the actual team did. Purely because I feel like exactly what you said there, Suj. Most people could nearly name this team, which is remarkable, really. You have to remember, to give it some sort of context, that Ajax had won the European Cup on 4 previous occasions in 69, and then the 3 years in a row, 71, 72 and 73. By the way, a tip for someone, if you want to look for an old video, try and find the European Cup final victory against Rotterdam in Inter Milan in the early 70s. That is football way ahead of its time and is worth looking at. It's really cool. Cruyff, etc., going mad on Inter Milan.
Yeah.
So they've only won the 1 European Cup since 1973, which was this one in 1995. Now, although Ajax was still a powerhouse in European football at the time, obviously the game was evolving and other clubs and other leagues were coming into far greater sums of money in terms of what they could do in terms of power, which obviously makes what Ajax achieved last year in the Champions League so remarkable, in the sense they had basically all these good young players come together at the same time. That's what I said to you at the time, was that for an Ajax to ever do this again, that's the only way it's going to happen. Where you get like that Ajax team come through together, or like the Leeds team that nearly did in the early noughties. And this Ajax team, it's phenomenal when you look back at it and see just how many came through the academy. Is amazing.
And a large number then went on to play in Europe, big clubs in Italy, Spain, and even the UK. I mean, there's a number of these guys that came to English football as well, whether it be middle of their careers, later in their careers. I think most probably a bit later in their careers rather than maybe in their prime. But we did get to see the likes of Lippmann and Reitziger and stuff in the Premier League or in English football.
Yeah, so they got to the final. Basically, it was relatively straightforward in terms of how they got there in retrospect, looking back on it. Milan were the big opposition in their group stage, and Ajax beat them 2-0 home and away in the group, comfortably went through. They played Croatian side Ajax Split in the quarterfinals, won that fairly comfortably, and then in the semis, after drawing 0-0 in Munich, thumped them 5-2 back in Amsterdam. before beating Milan in the final in Vienna 1-0 through a very late goal from Patrick Kluivert. But they were an astonishing team at the time. They went through 52 consecutive league games without being beaten. The same year that they won this Champions League, they won 5-0 at Feyenoord, beat Feyenoord and PSV both 4-1 at home. Those were the two major rivals, basically. And they went a total of 19 Champions League games undefeated as well, stretching from this campaign all the way to losing the final the following year to Juventus on penalties in Rome.
Yeah, and two famous managers in this match as well, Louis van Gaal and Fabio Capello, who went on to have incredible careers in the 15 years that followed.
I mean, Louis van Gaal, basically, when he later went to Barcelona, took half of this team with him from various parts from all over the place. So many of this side ended up together again back at Barcelona, but wasn't able to replicate what he had done when it was a little bit more youthful at Ajax. So what I want to do, Suj, is run through basically the 11 and the subs on that day in Vienna, take a little trip down memory lane on some of these players and talk about our memories of some of them.
Sure thing. Let's start with number one and the goalkeeper, Edwin van der Sar.
What a goalkeeper.
9
years at Ajax, then went on and had to have a spell at Juventus. Wasn't the best period of his career when he went there in 99. Was actually replaced by Gianluigi Buffon. Juventus spent an awful amount of money to get him. 30-odd million quid for a goalkeeper in 2001 was massive. And he could have gone to Man United, apparently, but didn't, and spent 4 years at Fulham. And then ended up at Man United in 05 for 6 years, finished his career there. He holds the incredible feat of the longest ever consecutive clean sheet run in world football, a total of 1,311 minutes without conceding a goal in the 2008-2009 season on their way to Man United's way to winning the title that year, and also the Champions League final before they lost to Barcelona. He's also the oldest player ever to win the Premier League. He's now Chief Executive Officer at Ajax. 130 international caps, a glittering career. One of the great goalkeepers of the last 30 years, no question.
Without doubt, I think he was the one that maybe came in and was able to fill Schmeichel's gloves a little bit. I mean, it's hard. Those are big-ass gloves to fill. I always felt like Edwin van der Sar, I was going to say blossomed late in his career, or it felt like he came to Manchester United particularly late, but it wasn't like he peaked late because he'd had a good career throughout. I guess he just came and experienced the trophies and everything that came with it at Manchester United quite late in his career. And goalkeepers do obviously have much longer.
Well, one of the things he was
lifespan.
Obviously blessed with was, and it was difficult for many goalkeepers who came through in that era, was obviously he started playing for Ajax and then the back pass rule come in. But obviously Dutch kids, and obviously schooled through Ajax, etc., especially, were always so technically gifted. So as a goalkeeper, it wasn't a huge problem for him. I don't think you were seeing too much tiki-taka stuff from him at the back in goal, but he was always very good with his kicking. It was never an issue. It's just odd looking back on it on that spell at Fulham. I mean, Fulham paid a solid 7 million to take him off Juventus, which wasn't cheap money either at the time. It just, one of the things he said when he joined Fulham was that he felt loved and respected again. I felt like the period at Juventus didn't go so well for him, and I think the players, all of these players, had a big attachment to Ajax, basically. Like a few left and then came back later on, for example. And obviously Van der Sar's back at Ajax now, working behind the scenes. And I think that's why he ended up at Fulham rather than, say, Man United first. But yeah, United basically wasted 6 years on goalkeepers before they got Van der Sar in.
Yeah.
And at least after when Van der Sar went, although it took a little while, they basically got it right with David De Gea as well.
Yeah.
So this team lined up basically in a 3-4-3 formation, but not a 3-4-3 as we would know it now with particular wide backs as such. What you're basically looking at is 3 defenders and a diamond in front of that. And then 3 forwards with 2 very out-and-out wingers would be the only real wide players. But when you had the diamond midfield that this lot had, it didn't really particularly
matter.
It just kept the ball so well on that. So the back 3, we'll start with Michael Reisiger.
Mm.
He played for Ajax between 1990 and 96, also went on to Milan, Barcelona, PSV. He had a brief season at Middlesbrough that some English fans might remember. He got another monstrous amount of caps, as did many at his side. 72 caps from Holland. Came through the academy at Ajax and is now assistant coach at the club. He was probably not technically as sound as many of the rest of this team, who I think you would all call technically great players. Rajak had different assets in terms of his pace and his athleticism.
Yeah, he was rapid.
But a very, very good player as well.
Mm.
You know, he survived 7 years at Barcelona. You're not, and I know he wasn't always first choice during that period, but you last at Barca for 7 years. You're not a Mickey Mouse footballer, right?
No, agreed. Yeah, I always remember with Rajak his pace more than anything else is the attribute that you remember. He'd get his timing and pace right, even if he wasn't the most gifted on the ball.
He was quick as. I've got to be honest, I can't really remember him at Middlesbrough. I don't know if it was just drunk years of my life, 04, 05, which it may well have been. I don't remember seeing him too much at Middlesbrough. Just don't recall it.
Mm.
When you look at them clubs, Ajax, Milan, Barcelona, then Middlesbrough, something went wrong at some stage, didn't it?
Well, I mean, Middlesbrough had the likes of Juninho and Fabrizio Ravanelli, mate. So,
but not at that period. But Middlesbrough always had flamboyant signings.
They've had ball players.
At this stage, they had
and he
the
only
likes
played
of
22 games, right, for them.
They had the likes of Mark Viduka. Obviously, they pulled off a major coup when they got Mendieta, who was a footballer that I really loved that didn't quite work out at Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
There's another one for you, Icons. Go and look at his volleyed goal for Valencia in the new camp against Barcelona. One of the great volleyed goals of all time. I don't really remember him in that period at Middlesbrough, actually.
Mm. You had the captain in the middle as well, Danny Blind.
Danny Blind, father of obviously Daley Blind, who's now back at Ajax and obviously spent a long period at Manchester United. Blind was one of only two players who didn't start his career in the Ajax academy, who started in this final that was Dutch. Yeah. He had 7 years at Sparta Rotterdam before going on to play for Ajax for 13 years. He's basically a fullback in his early career, but then converted into someone not too dissimilar to Ronald Koeman, perhaps not the raking range of passes that you might have seen from Koeman, but a very, very solid centre-half who was more than comfortable stepping out with the ball. Extreme quality on the ball, very rarely gave it away, stepped into midfield regularly. As many of these, particularly in the mid-90s, we had people like sort of Mateus doing it, Bayern Munich as well, where it was common practice for sweepers to be stepping out fully into midfield rather than just a drop-off and play deeper, say like a Connor Cody does now at Wolves. Blind stepped into midfield and he'd go in and join in attacks if he felt like it was right. He only got 42 caps for Holland. I don't know if that's because he'd spent 7 years at Sparta earlier in his career, but I guess what might have influenced that is obviously like the comparison is with Koeman. I don't suppose they would have played together all that often for Holland.
No, I mean, they did have depth there at the back if you look at some of the others we're going to talk about as well. So that may have an element to do with it. He was I suppose, even though he didn't start his career and come through the academy at Ajax, the fact that he played 370 plus games for them and then went on to manage them, you could almost be forgiven for thinking that was his boyhood club and what he grew up in. He is an Ajax man through and through, right?
Yes, absolutely. As many of these, as I said, had much allegiance with this football club and ended up going back in some sort of capacity. Like as you said, Blind went back and managed them. He also went on to manage Holland, which was a pretty failed period, unfortunately, and has not been doing anything that I can find of note for the last sort of 7-8 years or so.
No. Frank Rijkaard came in at number 4. Or do you want to go through the centre-backs?
I'll go through Frank de Boer first, if I can.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because he was the left-sided of this three defensively. Frank de Boer was an exceptionally gifted left-footed player. He would take set pieces regularly. People might remember a stunning free kick he smashed home against France in the group stage at Euro 2000. His is also an array of clubs that he played for: Ajax, Barcelona, Galatasaray, little spell at Rangers with his brother Ronald de Boer before finishing his career in Qatar. 112 caps for Holland. Originally began his career when he came through as a left back and then converted into a centre-back. He managed Ajax. One interesting story about Frank de Boer, which I don't think I've ever told you before, Suj, is in 2014, he would have been my first choice to get the Spurs job over Pochettino.
Okay.
That was who I really wanted at the time. He was doing good things in Holland.
Ask McTavius how that would have worked out for you.
Well, yeah, the thing is, around that period, the Ajax team that was kind of dominating in the Eredivisie wasn't having quite such a successful period. Once De Boer started getting links with many of these jobs, he had an incredibly failed period at Inter Milan. And then, obviously, Mourinho called him the worst manager in Premier League history following the 4-game spell at Crystal Palace. And from being really sought after as one of the best young coaches in Europe 3-4 years ago, he's now in the MLS as manager of Atlanta United.
What everybody really wants to know, and this is one for the people on YouTube, James, is Frank de Boer over my left shoulder or over my right shoulder?
That's a brilliant question. I think he's over your left shoulder, which would be to the right for the viewers.
I have no idea, to be honest with you, because they don't have the numbers of the players on their shorts. But
yeah,
for those that are not listening, I've got a picture on my background, which is both Frank and Ronald. One's on one side, one's on the other, and no one knows which is which.
It's not clear. I'm going to be honest. I'm not certain. Yeah. Write in the comments. I think he's on your left shoulder, Suj. So to the right for the viewers.
We'll soon find out.
He also, just another interesting one on De Boer, which I didn't know till I did some reading on this. But he actually tested positive for nandrolone, banned substance in 2000, but successfully appealed the ban.
Okay, that sounds like what Ben Johnson took. I feel like that's the drug that Ben Johnson took.
I couldn't find any information in terms of if he actually served any ban at all, other than like he appealed it and got off.
Okay, fair play. Maybe it was in his water, James.
That would have been why he was at Barcelona, and we'll come back onto Barca and the De Boers a little bit later. Frank Rijkaard, as you mentioned, Suj, came through the Ajax system. Wow, I mean, yeah, wow. I think I would say before I talk about his career, you think of some of these players and you think might have struggled with some of sort of the pace of the modern era, etc. You could drop Frank Rijkaard into any era and he would have done well, mate.
Yeah, I think so. With Frank Rijkaard, a lot of my memories of him are allied with Ruud Gullit at the same time, maybe because of international football. And I always feel like he was in Ruud Gullit's shadow a little bit, especially when they played for the national team. Maybe because his dreads were just the same, but a little bit shorter or what have you. But I think like maybe he played a little deeper, his position was different. But I always felt like Rijkaard never got the credit he deserved because he was in the same team as Gullit, and Gullit got the credit and stole.
Yeah, well, I mean, by association, they were obviously at AC Milan together, played in the Holland side, the dreads, etc. Led to natural comparisons between the two players who their playing styles, etc. But were very different footballers. But they were also physical powerhouses as well. If you know,
strong.
Gullit was a big, elegant lad, but he was a forward. Rijkaard was a central defender in his early days with Ajax. And it was only once Arrigo Sacchi got him at AC Milan that he turned into this bastion of a defensive midfield player. Which
I would have almost said he was a quarterback, no? Spraying the ball around and keeping it and giving it.
Rijkaard could play any position. You could play him as an 8, a 6, a 4, anything. Because he was elegant on the ball, but he had all the power as well. You know, you could have put him in them battles with Vieira and Keane in that era, for example, and they would have been good fun. I don't know if Rijkaard ever got the opportunity to play against those guys. But he would have held his own, no doubt about it. He could look after himself. Was infamously, obviously, sent off in the last 16 of Italia 90 for spitting at Rudi Völler, not once, but twice. Which, unfortunately, I think is what people remember most for his career, rather than the greatness of football he was. I think if I said to people on the street, Frank Rijkaard, what do you remember first? I think the modern listener would probably say, well, he was manager of the Barcelona team that recovered so well in the mid to late noughties. But the older ones would say spit. That's what people remember most. More than say the fact that he scored the only goal for Milan in the final against Benfica, which was played in the same stadium as this, by the way. That's what people remember most, is the spit on Rudi Völler.
Yeah, possibly. Maybe you just put me in that bracket of older, because I still think about his from a footballing point of view rather than that. And he had over his career, despite being a defensive midfielder, I mean, he scored 1 in 5, roughly, give or take. So it's a decent goal record.
Yeah. It was a very good player. That's what I said, that you can't limit to restrict him as a holding midfielder as such.
No.
You could play him as an attacking midfielder. And like I said, earlier in his career, he was basically a centre-half. He started at Ajax. One interesting story, another one that I really didn't know, was he fell out basically with the Ajax manager in '87. It can't have been Van Gaal at the time. In fact, it was Cruyff. I think he fell out with Cruyff. And in a hurry, he joined Sporting Lisbon in Portugal. And they didn't register in time, so he couldn't play for them. So he actually went to Sporting Lisbon. He never played for them. They shipped him out on loan to Real Zaragoza in Spain. He performed quite well. And then Milan bought him straight away before he ever played for Sporting Lisbon. And then, obviously, in '93, he returned to Ajax as a very different player to the one that had left 6 years earlier. And obviously, Cruyff was gone on that as well. But, he refused to play for Cruyff. He's like, I'm going, I'm out. There were many Dutch players who did have bust-ups, didn't they? Think back to the scandals pre-Euro 96 and that as well, when there were supposed cliques between the white players and the black players.
Yeah.
A few of them like to row, I think. Which possibly brings us on nicely to the pitbull, Edgar Davids, a player obviously close to my heart. And I guess Suj's for his spell at Barnet.
Barnet, manager of the beloved Barnet FC.
Before we talk his career a little bit, Suj, basically Davids ended up at Barnet. When he had his spell at Tottenham, he loved life in London. And when he left Ajax for the second time, he basically came back to live in North London. I think he still does. And he ended up becoming player manager at Barnet between 2012 2014. I was reading, Suj, that quite often for away games, if they had an overnight stay, he refused to go. I also read that in his final season, before he was dismissed, or he might have resigned in fairness, in the first 8 games of the season, he picked himself in all of them. He was booked 8 times and sent off 3 times. So, no messing about.
Nah.
But, I mean, he really is also a who's who. You look at the teams he played for. Ajax from 91, 96, another through the academy. A year at Milan. 7 years at Juventus with, many of that spent with the likes of Zidane. A loan at Barcelona, which was short, but a lot of people credit it with actually saving Frank Rijkaard's job, because Rijkaard spent 5 years in charge of Barcelona between 03 and 08. And if you look back at Barcelona in that period, I'm telling you, a modern Barcelona wouldn't make it through that period now without getting sacked. So, I mean, basically, David's come in mid-season. Barcelona were bottom half. They ended up finishing second. Then he went to Inter Milan. Obviously, Barcelona went on to bigger things. They went and bought Ronaldinho and the likes of that. He spent a year at Inter, then 18 months at Tottenham, and he was great. Same with Spurs. The one thing at Spurs he did, he changed the mentality within the dressing room in terms of making them winners. It wasn't acceptable to go away from home and be Spursy anymore. So it was the start of him changing the mentality. I think he was absolutely pivotal in that. Then he went back to Ajax. Then he basically retired in 08. Then he rocked up at Crystal Palace for 6 games in 2010, retired again, and then rocked up as player manager at Barnet, which, when you consider the other clubs I've mentioned, is so random, but also so
very
brilliant.
Random. Yeah.
He was a top player. I would describe Davids, for those who'd never seen him, as, think about, it's worth saying, obviously he had glaucoma, so he wore glasses.
He was...
but think about how nice N'Golo Kante is. And then think about N'Golo Kante on drugs and acting like an idiot.
Yeah.
That's Edgar Davids. Great footballer. At his peak, I would have said, probably not at this Ajax team, I would have said Juventus. I think around sort of France 98 time, there was nobody better than what he did.
I love your analogy of N'Golo Kante. In terms of David's playing style, like getting around the pitch, unbelievable energy. I don't think you would say he was blessed with the most amount of pace, but tenacity and timing. He'd be in the right place at the right time and have that short burst of pace to take the ball away from someone. So, yeah, whether or not N'Golo Kante on drugs, I just think if you if you were to say one of the most combative defensive midfielders ever would be Roy Keane. I think if you had Roy Keane's mindset in N'Golo Kante's playing style with more high energy, you might get an Edgar Davids. I don't know if he was as nuts, but he definitely, like, if you look at midfield battles, the likes of the Vieira Keane battle, he was at that level of aggression and strength and, yeah, no nonsense winner.
I also remember very fondly, the reason I use the Kante comparison, I don't think Davids was the best technically. And I always think that about Kante as well. But like, if you could go and buy any player to do a Kante job, you wouldn't go and pick someone who was technically better. You just go and get Kante. That's why, they reckon Real Madrid are looking at him, because he's brilliant. And if it had been 20 years ago, they would have been looking at Davids. It was brilliant as well. I remember Davids playing in Ledley King's testimonial, and it was basically current players versus old players. And the second half, the current players were all kids, basically. Davids was trying to insult these kids, mate, by taking the mickey out of them. He turned up for a showboat, and it was brilliant. He was a top player. So was his partner in midfield, the illustrious and brilliant Clarence Seedorf.
Yes. What
a player. The only player to win Champions League for 3 different clubs, 87 caps for Holland, just the 13 more than Davids. They would have played many of them together, I should imagine. Started with Ajax, had a year's spell with someone else in Italy I won't mention in case you haven't listened to the quiz from yesterday.
Yeah, true.
He had a 3-year spell at Real Madrid, another 3 years at Inter Milan, and then at his peak, an absolutely brilliant 10 years at AC Milan, where basically him, Gattuso and Pirlo were basically the three in midfield for the best part of 10 years. You think of Pirlo's elegance, Gattuso's all-round, I'm going to kill you, nutcase mentality. And Seedorf just linked everything so beautifully. It was his job to really join in.
Give and go.
Support, whether it was a Rivaldo, for example, or more commonly, Kaka, when they were really at their pomp in sort of 2007. I remember the Champions League semi-finals against United. Kaka seems to get all the credit off the back of that. Seedorf was fantastic. Top player. Generally played central midfield, but you could fit him into a number of different systems and roles within a central midfield. Wonderful footballer. Yeah,
there are no words. That I can add on top of that. He just did everything well, and neat and tidy player. You think back to that midfield, anyone in the Premier League would almost take that. Gattuso, Pirlo, Seedorf today. I reckon that's another example of a midfield that would make it in the Premier League.
I think I could live with Rijkaard, Seedorf and Davids as well, mate. I mean, Mike, what a midfield. Yeah. Worth saying on Seedorf, a bit like Davids, his managerial career wasn't quite as good as his playing career. Here's an amazing stat for you. So after leaving Milan, he actually went to Brazil and played 2 years for Botafogo in Brazil. And since then, he's managed Milan, Shenzhen in China, Deportivo La Coruña and the Cameroon national side. Between those 4 jobs, he's amassed a total of 64 matches. I think you can do the average there. It's an average of 16 per club. He was a little bit unlucky at Milan, where he stepped back in and left Brazil instantly to go and help them when they were in trouble. He didn't keep the job full time, basically. In China, didn't go well. Deportivo, he had a disaster and they got relegated. And then he picked up the Cameroon job. He actually took Patrick Kluivert as assistant, but they lost in the last 16 of the African nations to Nigeria, and he was booted out of that as well.
That was that.
Great players don't necessarily make great managers.
No, that is true.
He taught a good game, though. He's been an analyst on BBC a few times, I think. He speaks about 6 different languages, as a lot of these Dutch players do. What a player.
Good player.
The man in front of that midfield 3 was the first of the 2 that started that wasn't Dutch. Jari Litmanen, people who Champman 0102 players might remember at the moment. He'd obviously spent 4 or 5 years in Finland, where he was from, leaving Finnish club Maipar, brilliantly named Maipar, who I remember playing Liverpool in Europe in one competition in the mid to late 90s. Spent 7 years at Ajax before going on to a couple of years at Barcelona. Then there were short spells at Liverpool under Gerard Houllier, a return to Ajax, and then a number of clubs, which included him signing for Fulham He never actually appeared for them. He actually, I didn't know, when he signed for Fulham, actually sent him back to Finland for a little while because they were concerned he had a heart condition. Not the only person in this Ajax squad to potentially have a heart condition. But basically, from the last 10 years of his career were just completely blighted by injuries.
Yep.
He was a fantastic number 10. I remember us playing at Liverpool, it must have been in 01 or 02, and he scored the only goal. And he was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. When Houllier signed him for Liverpool, he basically said, I've bought one of the best number 10s in the world. We didn't play him enough. Then they had Fowler, Owen and Heskey. So I don't know whether... There was a spate of clubs in the early noughties in this country who felt they needed 4 forwards constantly. I remember Spurs having like Bent, Berbatov, Keane, Defoe. Like, who's... you only played 2 of them, really. It wasn't like you could be playing Bent as a wide forward or anything. So only 2 of them was ever going to play. And that was the case in this Liverpool team, unless they shunted Heskey into a wide position, which they did on occasion. But top player. The people at Ajax rave about him. They called him... He'd earned a nickname at Ajax of Merlin. People thought he was a magician. Great player. Another one held in high regard, even though he wasn't Dutch, ended up going back there later in his career.
Jari Litmanen, definitely one of the stars of the team.
137 caps for Finland. Now, I know it's Finland, but 137
I was going to say, the competition
caps,
is...
I mean, he always got picked, no doubt, but 137 caps is massive, mate.
Yeah, for sure. Where are we going? Left or right, James?
We'll go right. We'll go right wing. We'll go from right to left with this front three. So right wing, another one in Champman FPL. Finidi George. Future full of fun, I learnt, is what Finidi means.
Okay.
And I think he was fun because a little bit like Reisiger on that right side for Ajax, probably Finidi George also wasn't the best technically. Rapid pace as well, like the other fellow on the left-hand side who did have a bit more technical quality. Obviously started his career in Nigeria. Basically, he came over to Ajax with Kanu.
Yep.
Spent 3 years at Ajax before moving on to a very ambitious Real Betis side in 1996. Spent 4 years there before they went down, stayed in La Liga for another year with Mallorca. And then spent a couple of quite unsuccessful years, really, at Ipswich Town. I remember when they bought him and thinking, how have they got him? Like, what's everyone else doing? But it didn't really happen for him. He went back and had another year with Mallorca following leaving Ipswich. And so it didn't feel like the longest career, particularly. Another one, 62 caps for Nigeria. Very, very good player. I also remember, do you remember his celebration in USA 94, Suj?
I do not. Remind me.
He scored for Nigeria against Greece in the group stage, and he basically mimicked a dog weeing. That's what I remember most.
Oh, when they were on all fours. And
he cocked his leg up. And
yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember that goal celebration now.
I just thought I'd bring the tone down on this great side, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I probably wish I didn't remember it now, but I do. You look at his career, the number of games he played at club level, you're talking about 66, about less than 300 games compared to some of these guys that 500-600 games. He didn't really have the best club career.
No, but he was obviously a part of this brilliant side and deserved his place in it. It wasn't really anybody that missed out on injury, for example, that meant he played. He was a full part of this side. I think for him, unlike the majority of the others, it went on to be a bit unfulfilled. I think the whole thing with Betis, if you remember them, they went and bought like the Nilsson as well. They went mad and were trying to be like Madrid and Barca, and it never particularly worked out. The club wasn't really big enough or ready for it at the time. And it failed, basically. And I think he suffered for that as well.
And on the left, a player that had plenty of time in the Premier League, but also his career was glittering before, Mark Overmars.
Rapid.
Quick.
My God, he used to give me the shitters when he played for them down the road.
I mean, quick, but also end product. I think this is the thing with Mark Overmars.
Yeah. I'd be interested to get Arsenal fans' thoughts on if they preferred Overmars or Pires, because although astonishingly quick, the two of them, I think Overmars was a little bit more rapid. I think Pires was the better technical player. if Overmars got away from you, forget about it. All over. Gary Neville often speaks when he does like his soccer box things on Sky. Watch a couple of them when he watches back Arsenal United games. He's like, oh, I couldn't play against Overmars. I knew I'd go too tight,
quick.
and he'd just spin me, and he was gone. Rapid, properly rapid. He used to cut in on his right foot and score so often. It was the beginning of that kind of period where you began to get crosses from the byline rather than whipping it in for your big number 9 up front. The way Arsenal adapted to their playing style affected the way Premier League football was played on a larger scale as well. Top player. Another one suffered with injuries. He began his career at Go Ahead Eagles, then as spelt Willem II before joining Ajax. Spent 5 years there, obviously part of the Champions League winning team. Had 3 years at Arsenal. Barca then bought him and Emmanuel Petit for a combined 32 million, I believe. 25 million of that was on Overmars, apparently. But he really suffered with injuries at Barca. He had good spells, bad spells. And in 2004, he retired. And then he played a practice match in a testimonial or something in 2008 and ended up coming back and playing another year for his first club, Go Ahead Eagles. Played about 25 times for him in a final swan song 4 years after he'd originally retired. He's now the director of football back at Ajax. 86 Holland caps to his name. Which you think,
17 goals, decent record.
You think of the attacking talent that squad has had over the period that he would have been playing is no mean feat. Top player.
Incredible winger. Could go either foot. Just very, very good player. And a real big part of that Arsenal team that went on to do so well.
He scored pivotal goals from as well, didn't he? You think of the cup final goal against Newcastle in '98, the winning goal at Old Trafford a few months before that. When it mattered, he seemed to score big goals for Arsenal as well. Yeah,
very good player. And up top,
Ronald de Boer, brother of Frank.
The other de Boer.
I think less remembered of the two. I mean, he had 67 Dutch caps compared to 112 for his brother. Also,
he was potentially, would you say, in a more competitive position up top?
Yeah, I think that's possibly fair. I think
it was Kluivert then coming through, and
he was multifunctional. I mean, in this side, he was basically a false 9, I guess you would say, ahead of its time. But people probably remember him more as a right midfielder. But he played through the middle for this Ajax side in this final. Yeah. He joined Twente from Ajax after struggling to really break into the side originally. Then Ajax bought him back. Then there was the controversial move where Barcelona bought him and his brother Frank, where basically the two of them had agreed to sign 6-year contracts for Ajax and then managed to get it voided and force through moves to Barcelona. But it didn't really work out for him at Barca, whereas Frank spent a good number of years there. I think Frank was at Barcelona for 4 years. The Boer was Ronald was there for just a year. And he spent 4 years at Rangers, was part of the 2003 treble-winning Rangers side. And then, like his brother Frank, they both finished their career in Qatar. But he started as a forward, but I think the majority of people would still remember him playing for Holland really as a right-hand side midfielder, I think.
He had a good goal-scoring record at Rangers, 1 in 3 when he had that those seasons there. So decent goal-scoring record as well in his career.
He was a very good player. There wasn't anybody Mickey Mouse in this team, mate.
No. It would be very hard to. I mean, he kept the likes of Patrick Kluivert on the bench. So, admittedly, a young Patrick Kluivert, but still kept him on the bench. And they had Kanu on the bench as well.
Yeah, just to cover off the subs from that final. So there were 3 players who didn't get onto the pitch. I'm pretty sure you could only have 2 substitutes then. Fred Grimm was the backup goalkeeper. He spent a long period at Ajax. Notably from 1994 to 2002. 100 appearances, actually, but he was basically the backup goalkeeper. Winston Bogarde, Suj, an old friend of yours, who we always take the mick of, don't we, for robbing Chelsea of money.
4 seasons, 9 appearances at Chelsea.
He's actually assistant manager now at Young Ajax, which is basically Ajax's reserve / under 21 team. So he's another one still involved in the club. I mean, he played for some illustrious clubs as well, right? He was 3 years at Ajax following starting at SVV, Excelsior, Sparta Rotterdam earlier in his career. Also had spells at Milan and Barcelona. And then the notorious 4-year spell at Chelsea between 2000 and 2004. I did a bit of digging into this, Suj, right? Because I thought, you know what? Every story's got two sides.
Yep.
So the apparent story is that Chelsea bought Bogard behind Gianluca Vialli's back.
Okay.
Gianluca Vialli didn't want Bogard.
Yep.
Chelsea offered Bogard 40 grand a week. Bear in mind, this is 2000. To give you some context.
This is early Abramovich time, right?
No, Abramovich joined Chelsea in 04 or 03 maybe. 03 or 04.
Pre-Abramovich.
Yeah.
So it's not even that the Russian money's flowing around Chelsea.
No, well, if you think back to, people remember obviously the goal Jesper Gronkiar scored against Liverpool. I think it was the final day of 04. Before the Abramovich came in, Chelsea getting into the Champions League that year essentially helped get them Abramovich and possibly save the club. They were going the same way as Leeds.
Right.
Basically, that's the way they were going to go. They were fucked. Then all of a sudden, all the money came. And it's because of things like this. Now, to give you context for that 40 grand a week, one of the things I noticed when I was reading was when Overmars joined Arsenal, which was 3 years earlier. I remember we're talking about the best wingers on the planet here. He signed a contract on £18,000 a week. Winston Bogard was signed by Chelsea on £40,000 a week to essentially play backup for Chelsea. He was bought not as a first choice. And then once he got signed, Vialli was like, I don't want him. Like, get him out. So he ended up playing 11 times for Chelsea over 4 years, and he refused to leave no matter what. And his argument was, why would I leave? That's the contract I've signed. Think of it as employment rather than football for a second, kids.
Yeah. Why would you?
I'm on 40 grand a week. Him. I'm coming to the end of my career, and he never played for anyone else again afterwards, by the way.
Yeah.
This is my retirement money, basically. And so, listen, because it's Chelsea, I don't care. He took every penny off them, mate. Every penny off them. So what do you take? 8 million quid, basically? I think that works out.
Not bad going.
That's some work for 11 appearances, isn't it? What's that? About 850 grand per appearance or something?
Per game. It's about 10 grand a minute, James.
Wow.
10 grand a minute.
Wow. That's big, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the backstory of Bogard. Peter Van Vossen was the other unused substitute. You might remember him from last Thursday's podcast. He scored the late equalising penalty for Holland at Wembley. The two who came on during the game are more familiar names, Carnu and Patrick Kluivert. Obviously, Carnu was the other player I mentioned who Arsenal fans used to sing about him having problems with his heart. I can't remember how the song goes. I tend not to listen to that lot, as you know. He also had issues with his contract towards the end of his career with Portsmouth, following a spell at West Brom as well, because Portsmouth obviously went into administration. And I read, and I don't know if it's true, that Carnu was fighting Portsmouth for $3 million in owed wages, and eventually he let them keep it.
Oh, wow. Well, they needed it.
Yeah. I don't know if he'll ever come. Is that one of them where, I don't know, say they come into money and they get back into the Prem in 10 years? Does he go knocking on their door? By the way, lads, you owe me 3 million quid. I'm going to send half of Nigeria your way if you don't.
I'm sure Carnu's got enough money.
I'd say so. He'd obviously had a spell at Inter Milan as well, which was largely unsuccessful in between his Ajax and his Arsenal spell. He scored some important goals for Arsenal when he was there. I think it was unfortunate that when he went there, he didn't play as much as he would have at other times because of Bergkamp. Yeah. That two didn't really work as a combination, but, it was originally Anelka, and then obviously later on, it was always going to be one of those two up front. So Carnu didn't play as much as he should have for Arsenal. He was a very good footballer.
Yep, definitely.
And Patrick Kluivert, obviously 19-year-old, was going to be the big star of this, played for the Holland side at the following year's European Championships. Superstar forward. Takes the goal so well in this final. When you look back on it, even when you watch it, he takes it on his left and you think he's going to take it on his right. And then he just, as the keeper's coming out, he just toe pokes it in a flash and scores. You could argue that the keeper should have saved it, but it was a very instinctive finish that it wasn't a classic final, if we're honest. Yep. It's not one that I'd say go and sit back through it. But they were deserving winners. Kluivert obviously went on to play for Milan. Barca had a spell at Newcastle, which I think was largely unsuccessful. They had Bellamy and Shearer as well at the time. Then he played out of Valencia, PSV, and Lille with short stints with them.
Just seeing out his career by that point when
he finished his career earlier. He was never better than when he broke in at 1920, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, look at his goal record at Barcelona. It was a goal every other game, give or take.
It should be as a forward playing for Barcelona.
Yeah, true. But there's plenty that have been there and failed. So to do it over that many seasons, 180 games and score 90 goals, you've got quality about you. There's no doubting that he was a very, very good striker.
He's actually back at Barcelona now. He's his academy director. He knew where the onion bag was, no doubt about that. The leap for the equaliser against Brazil in the World Cup semi-final in '98 is quite iconic. And I won't ruin another quiz question from yesterday's quiz. But yeah, he was the scorer of 2 brilliant goals at Anfield in a playoff game for Holland before the Euros. I just think, Suj, it's one, unlike the others, I think when he broke through, people thought he was going to be the best striker on the planet. Yeah. He never got near that level. That's all I'm saying.
I agree with you. If we were to list the top 10 strikers of European football in the last 20 years, I don't know if he'd get in it. Yet he's still an incredibly good player. So I suppose, I agree with your point there that he didn't make it as one of the very, very, very best, but it feels harsh saying that because he was so good.
Well, he joined
Newcastle. Scored so many goals as well.
When he joined Newcastle, he must have been 28 or 29. It was hardly at the end of his career, but it feels like it looking back on it. And the 3 clubs he played for afterwards were all short stints, a year or so. He basically retired when he was about 32, 33. So he got 79 Holland caps despite playing regularly for the Dutch when he was like 18, 19. That's not the number that you compare to, say, Frank de Boer's 112, for example. He should have been a lot more. And nobody's saying he was a bad forward. I just think he didn't live up to what people's expectations were. That's all.
Correct. I agree with you on that. But looking back on it, you're right. I mean, hell of a team. You very rarely see a team come through the youth system like that and be able to do it. They nearly did it last year. The problem now is that as soon as you get a little bit of a sniff of talent, somebody will come in with a silly money offer and the teams get broken up very quickly. I don't think it's the last time, though, that will ever happen. I think we will see it again in the next 20 years.
I think if someone was to do that again, like Ajax in 95, and it's worth saying a couple of these guys, like the experienced Frank Rijkaard, came back to the club. But most of them, this was their first club, right? I think for this to happen again, it's only going to be a club like an Ajax or, I don't know, like a Benfica in Portugal, where they all get a group of these kids just all come through together at the same time.
Yeah.
And before anybody realises it, they're in a Champions League quarter-final and doing really well. That's the only way, really, that it's going to happen. These clubs, unfortunately, just don't have the power at the moment because of what their leagues currently are. And it's quite sad because I think particularly for the Dutch league, I grew up watching a lot of Ajax, PSV and Feyenoord. I'm sure the games used to be on Eurosport, maybe, originally in the early 90s. And they used to have a regular highlights program. So I used to watch a lot of Dutch football as a kid. Used to think of it as one of the big 5 or 6.
Yep.
Whereas now you would go, there's a big 4, and because of PSG, I guess that's the 5th. And the rest don't really matter, unfortunately. And they've always suffered because, a little bit like to compare, say, Portugal with Porto and Sporting Lisbon, for example. We know that every now and again you'll get like a Boa Vista or an FC Twente has that one year that they win the league. But really in Holland, it's Feyenoord who have struggled massively this century, other than the odd period. It's PSV and Ajax are the main team.
Ajax all the way. Very, very good club. One of my favourites.
So, unfortunately, it's only if they bring a set of kids together like they did last year and that, where they're going to break through and really do anything in Europe. And the problem still would be, it wouldn't have made it, in terms of their future, actually winning that competition last year wouldn't have changed anything for that football club. If anything, you might have just found that even more of them would have got bought straight away.
Agree with you.
I think, if you win the Champions League at Ajax, what else are you going to do in your career? Is probably how a lot of these...
It's true.
You look at the glittering clubs that so many of these players played for when they left Ajax, so many of them gone on to play on for like Barca or AC Milan, for example.
Inter Milan, Juventus,
Real Madrid, Inter,
Manchester
Juventus.
United, the lot.
Exactly. So none of them particularly. The disappointing one in terms of the clubs he played for afterwards, I guess, is Finidi George. But when he went to Betis, that Betis were trying hard to be one of the top teams in Spain. It just didn't work out.
Indeed. A nice little throwback there, James, looking back at a very interesting team that so many of our listeners will have memories of or will have heard of. So a good one. We'll be back next week with another Throwback Thursday. So if you want to know what we're going to be talking about next week, do follow James's account on Twitter at PlanetFPLPod and hit the notification bell because you'll be alerted as soon as we go live. Rest of the week, James, and Ask James tomorrow.
Yeah, Ask James tomorrow. Another Champman FPL stream Saturday with graphics, maybe.
Nice. A good one yesterday. I got 72 points yesterday, James. So I'm sitting
nice.
Shearer, Canute, Henry, Kevin Nolan. A clean sheet from... Who gave me a clean sheet? Was it Gallas? No. I had Gallas, Unsworth,
How to ruin the Ajax memorial.
Yeah. I think it was Melberg got a clean sheet yesterday. Yeah. So decent for me yesterday. So I'm happy. Clawed back a few points. And I didn't burn my wild card, so still in it.
Good man. I was 61 minus 8.
Okay, interesting. Do stay tuned. Do hit the notification bell, like, subscribe to the show to be up there with all of the podcasts as soon as they go out. We'll be back at you all of the rest of this week and next week with content as and when we do. Ciao for now.
Be nice to each other, everyone. Cue music, man, child.